Hello everyone, I'm Escambia County Sheriff David Morgan and welcome to this segment of the ECSO News. Tonight's segment will be entirely Ask the Sheriff questions. We receive volumes sometimes of requests that come in both by telephone, over Facebook, and sometimes on our blogs. Again, asking the sheriff to address law enforcement issues in our community. When the volume gets such that we can't do it in the segment that's normally associated with Ask the Sheriff, meaning the very end of ECSO News, we will take the entire 30 minutes in order to catch up on our call volume. The episode tonight is one of those that will handle that particular problem. By the way, it's a great problem to have. Continue to ask us questions. I'm Escambia County Sheriff David Morgan, and stand by. Tammy has a question about a wild fox that gets into her backyard, and Tammy asks, is it legal for her to shoot it? She lives in Brownsville. Tammy, the short answer is no, it's not legal for you to take the life of this animal, even though it's a wild animal that's on your property. The appropriate thing to do, Tammy, is to call the County Animal Control Office, which is located down on Fairfield. Those animal control officers will come up and they will set up traps in your backyard, again, where they will attempt to trap that particular animal, that fox, and then dispose of it in the appropriate way. So do not use a firearm or anything else. Please don't put poison out in your yard. Someone's pet, a cat or a dog may get into the poison, etc. We have professionals that actually do these things. Or you can call one of the local agencies that actually does, removal of animals such as this. There's folks in town that do pest control that also includes, animals such as raccoons and possum and fox and snakes. So you can also call them if you want someone to respond immediately. Or again, call animal control and they'll assist you in the wild fox that you have getting into your backyard. Sherry and Ryan make the observation that the jail is basically populated by those who have committed low-level crimes, and that we can save a lot of money, and it's probably not good policy to incarcerate these people. Sherry and Ryan, let me caution you again on buying into popular culture or kind of notions that are in vogue. This is one of them. When this came up a few weeks ago, we actually ran a study. People are talking about, we have people in there that have a $100 or less bond. The county's even thinking about coming up with the money, if you will, to pay the bonds. I think that's kind of an interesting take on a government entity paying the bond for someone who's being put in a government facility and who's now liable if they don't respond to the court date and the bond is revoked. This is another one of those, ideas where the pathway to hell is paved with good intentions. We ran those numbers. There was about 60 people in the Escambia County Jail out of about 1,500 inmates, 60 that met anywhere close to that criteria. But let me caution you folks on this. Let's say, which this rarely if ever happens by the way, that you were basically picked up for smoking marijuana. Let's keep this a real kind of low-level offense that, is kind of a ho-hum thing. And the only thing you had on you was the marijuana that you were using. Number one, our deputies don't have time for those low-level crimes. Almost always a civil citation is issued in those cases, meaning that, you show up for court, etc., because we don't load the Escambia County Jail up with those sorts of offenders. But let's take and run your recommendation through. And let's say that you're just a drug user, which we hear in society today that those are nonviolent criminals, and so I want to take all the nonviolent criminals out of jail. Now, if you're a heavy marijuana user, and most people, if you smoke weed long enough, you'll become a heavy marijuana user if you're not right now, because it is a gateway drug. Again, you can argue those statistics all you would like, that it is what it is. If you're using marijuana, you most likely will graduate to other drugs. Now, if you're a heavy marijuana user, you're not what we would call a model employee, meaning that even if you have a service job, let's say that you work at one of the local restaurants or at Walmart, one of those places, you're in retail, but it's a lower skilled job at an entry level. Number one, if you're a heavy drug user, you're not going to be the model employee. You're not going to show up for work every day. And so you're probably going to be, if you bet at best, a serial employee, meaning that you work here a couple of months, or if we're lucky, a couple of months. You lose that job because you didn't show up for work, and then you apply for another one, and that's what's called a serial employee. You just cycle through a lot of low-level jobs, meaning entry-level jobs. But you're still using marijuana. Now, how are you going to support your marijuana habit? I can tell you that drug dealers, are not a government program, and they're not about charity. And so therefore, in order to secure the funds that you need to sustain your growing drug habit, you're going to engage in what? You're going to engage in low-level crimes. It's going to start out with small petty theft, graduate to car burglaries, home invasions, etc., until again you graduate up to where you're in the big dollars now and you are committing, high-level felonies. That, unfortunately, is the truth about the cycle of drugs and drug usage and those who are involved in the drug culture. So again, this popular cultural notion that we have these, mild and meek-mannered drug users out here that are of no harm to anybody, they're kind of like playing with a basket full of puppies, is complete and utter nonsense. So while we don't load the jail up with quote-unquote low-level nonviolent offenders, they certainly will graduate at some point to a criminal who needs to sustain their drug habit. That's the sad fact about drugs and drug usage. Zachary has sent us an email, and his observation is that he recommends that more social services resources be directed to the county as opposed to incarceration. Well, Zachary, there's folks that are far more experts at this than you and I. So let me give you a little bit of background on social service programs. Things that we look at for crime prevention, crime deterrence, tracking someone from a life of crime and into this. And Zachary, while almost all of these programs are very well intentioned, they have to start very, very early. We know that there are early intervention programs like Big Brothers and Big Sisters, PACE Center for Girls, some of your faith-based organizations that run, early intervention programs, many social services type things. Early intervention is the key for, long-term criminal activity being either stopped or diminished at a minimum. Once a young man or young woman determines they're going to enter into a life of crime, if you will, or engage in criminal activity, it becomes now almost an addiction. And so social service programs or rehabilitative programs are effective in a minimal sort of way. So while it's, a nice thing to say if we had things for young people to do, they wouldn't engage in crime. But again, that's symbolic, and it's not provable, if you will, from statistics. And let me give you an example. If that was the case, then every child that grows up poor should be engaged in criminal activity because they don't have the latest iPad or iPhone. They don't have a great home and life environment, etc. But we know that not to be true. We know that a lot of children from very poor families grow up to be academically superior to many others, and it's based upon their want, needs, and desires. It also comes back to, again, the effectiveness of parenting, in the family units. So there's a whole host of reasons why we have crime. But building more facilities is a short, quick, symbolic answer that's really anecdotal. They don't work. I can tell you that we have parks and community centers throughout Escambia County that have little or no use. You can build those facilities, but I certainly can't compel children to go to them, or I can't compel families to parent their children. So again, it's a nice idea that doesn't work. Hello everyone. We're doing a follow-up to a question that Angela asked a couple of episodes back about, I guess, a citation that she received as a result of the tint on her driver and passenger side windows being too dark. Obviously, Angela didn't like the answer we gave her the first time. So Angela, we went back and took the time to run this through our legal department. And they are unaware of any factory installed tint being put on either, driver or passenger side windows. They do tint front windshields and occasionally back windshields, but tint being applied at a manufacturer on those other windows they're unaware of. But be that as it may, you are the owner of the vehicle, and as our legal department has ruled, that you can go to traffic court and use this as a defense if you can prove that it was in fact factory installed, meaning it's between the glass on the windows and it's not applied to the outside or inside, and see if that's a defense. However, we believe it probably will not be. Why? Because again, upon purchasing that vehicle, you're responsible for any and all safety equipment and any add-ons to your vehicle. I'm not sure if I used the example of California the last time, but if I had, let me reiterate to you even so. If you purchase a vehicle outside the state of California, and I know I lived in California for several years while I was still stationed, while I was still serving on active duty with the United States Air Force. As you know, California has some very strict laws as far as vehicle emissions go, probably some of the strictest in the nation. So as a military member, if you bring a vehicle that's above a certain year when they started putting emission requirements on a vehicle out to California, and after you meet the residency requirements there, usually within the first 30 days, you have to get your car re-licensed in the state of California. Part of that licensing requirement is an emissions standard check. If your vehicle doesn't pass the emissions standards check, it can't be licensed in the state of California, nor legally actually be operated on the highways and byways in that state. Now again, you're the owner of that vehicle, and so therefore you're responsible for any emission upgrades that would bring that vehicle up to standards in order for it to be legally operated in the state of California. You have a very similar circumstance here with your vehicle. While again, we're sorry that you're having to go through this, but that's what happens sometimes to us. Continuing with the tinted windows theme, we have another citizen that is asking, why is it that deputies can have tinted windows that are so dark you can't see inside? Well, for several reasons. Number one, we do that for officer safety, meaning that is an officer's office, and so the things that they do in their vehicle, need to be concealed. And also, this applies to anyone that we have in custody. That way, a passerby, if you happen to be arrested, and let's say, unfortunately, which it does happen, we don't like to talk about it, but it does happen, you or a family member are falsely arrested, or you've been injured and you're in the back of the vehicle. Do you want folks going by with their cell phones, as everyone does today, taking photos of you in a police vehicle, when it may be, again, for a very innocent thing, a deputy's lending you assistance or rendering assistance on the roadway, and now there's photos showing up on YouTube that you're in the back of a police cruiser. Do you want those sort of photos out there? And the answer is no. So that's another reason why we have that. It's also for the equipment inside the vehicle. Our officers have computers and cell phones and air conditioning, and if you got a K9 in your car, there's an additional thing there. That's used to keep the heat out of the deputy's vehicle. And as you well know, because if you're engaged in law enforcement, or actually first responders as a whole, this also applies to the fire department and EMS. While it's against the law to text and drive, because so many of our messages come over the officer's agency-issued cell phone, and we do it that way, again, for safety concerns and also to keep it from the public venue, they'll receive text messages, and so they are allowed to look at their cell phone and view a text message where the citizens can't. There are exceptions to those involved or engaged in certain activities that the average citizen are not allowed to do. The tinted windows on the deputy's vehicle is one more of those. Stephen asked if the Sheriff's Office here has ever considered lateral transfers from other law enforcement agencies, either within the state of Florida, or I will assume, Stephen, from anywhere in the United States. Stephen, we do that with regularity. We have officers that work in the other parts of Florida. Those are the easiest ones because they've already met Florida, criminal justice training standard requirements. So their transfer to our agency is relatively simple. The issue that we run into is how many years of service can be credited when the officer comes over as they apply to promotions. Now for retirement, it remains the same. If they're a participant in the Florida retirement system, you can work in Pinellas County and come to Escambia County and continue with your service and pay into your Florida retirement system account. Now, we have a union here. It's called a collective bargaining unit. It's the PBA, the Police Benevolent Association. And they've determined that when an officer comes to work for us from another agency, number one, the agency has to be of a certain size in order for it to be creditable, if you will, and also they'll only credit so many years Why? It's an issue of what's fair. Let's say you worked in Pinellas County for a couple of years and now you transfer to Escambia County, and you're only here a couple of years, and now you can sit for the sergeant's exam. And so you're competing with officers that have been here 5 years or more, and yet you're competing on the same playing field with them. Or let's say you were at an agency that had 10 people, and it was basically a Mayberry RFD, and there was little or no on the street experience, if you will. So the PBA in the negotiations and the setting of the collective bargaining unit contract that we have, kind of call the shots on those things and trying to be fair to the officers that have started their careers here and stayed, as opposed to officers coming from the outside. But yes, you are credited with service. We do accept those training standards from other states. If you come in and you're not certified in the state of Florida, there's several avenues that you can take, even if you're prior military who served a career in, say, the military police or did military police time. They're referred to as short courses. You can get your training standards out of the way pretty quickly by some 90-hour courses. I think is probably the one that's recommended the most. And it's taught in various venues around the state of Florida, and then you can get your criminal justice training standards set for the test, and then of course you're ready to go working for the Escambia County Sheriff's Office. But we do that, Stephen, with regularity. Richard asked if you can be pulled over for loud music, and is that a secondary reason or a primary reason? Officers have wide latitude, Richard, in affecting traffic stops. At one time, even the seatbelt law could only be secondary, meaning that I pulled you over for another traffic infraction. Let's say you ran a stop sign or you were speeding, and then, oh, by the way, I noticed you or some of your passengers weren't wearing a seatbelt, and then you'd be cited for that. We now can actually make a stop if the officer can visually see that a seatbelt is not on or a child restraint device is not being used. Loud music is the same way. Now, you're probably going to ask yourself, why do officers do that? Well, I know you probably find this hard to believe, Richard, but I was young once myself, and everybody likes to crank the music up. But the problem is, Richard, when you do that, then all your auditory functions shut down, meaning that you can't hear sirens, you can't hear horns being honked. You're just kind of getting in the groove with your music. Not a bad thing, but it's also a safety issue, and that's why that law is there. If you can kind of cruise through an intersection, if you will, because you couldn't hear the lights and siren of a responding police vehicle or an ambulance or a fire truck, and you end up getting T-boned in an intersection because you were listening to your favorite tunes and not listening to the traffic behind you. Driving is a dangerous enough exercise for any of us to be engaged in, and so when we allow ourselves to be distracted by cell phones or loud music, etc., it's more not about the public safety as to your personal pleasure. Maria asked the question, why does it take so long, or why is there a time lag between a young person especially, or it could be an adult, it could be an elderly person, that's missing before the report is given and put out to the media? Well, Maria, we don't control that. We don't have a chip in everybody in Escambia County, meaning that we don't know where you are and what you're doing or if you're missing. We depend solely upon reports from the community, and almost always it's from a family member or a close friend or a caregiver who will tell us that, John Smith has been missing now, for the last several hours or last several days, and we'll go and take the appropriate report and then disseminate that information out through those agencies and media that we think is appropriate to start the search for that person. I would agree with you, Maria, especially with habitual runaways, young people who, again, have done this time and time and time again. There are times that family members don't notify us for days or weeks after they have been missing, when they finally decide, well, this has gone beyond their last runaway episode, and so maybe there is something to them being gone and or hurt. And many times, as you know, this individual will pop up on a Facebook post, in another state or whatever. But we don't control that, Maria. When we get the report, we take the appropriate action. Again, this is another societal issue where we have family members or caregivers that make an arbitrary decision that individual is just, again, running away and I'll hear from them in a few days, when in fact, they may have come to some harm. But we most assuredly take the appropriate action when it's reported. Kayla asked why a lot of the quick trips and other areas of town here can, display pipes and things that are normally associated with drug paraphernalia. Well, Kayla, a long, long time ago, having possession of certain items, is no longer, a violation of the law or prosecutable. As you recall, there was a time when, an alligator clip, which is used for electrical connections for testing, was attached via usually a leather thong to some feathers, and it was in vogue at that time, to smoke your roach using the clip, the alligator clip and the feathers, and it was a very fashionable, in vogue thing to do. Well, people liked those so much because they, not only had feathers, but they put beads on them, and they became almost a fashion accessory, and people would hang them from their rear view mirrors. And a lot of folks got stopped, if you will, not too many years ago, and said, hey, you have drug paraphernalia in your car, and searches ensued and sometimes arrests, etc. Or there was a time that we would even take the clip itself, and check for, marijuana or hash residue, and arrest would be made for that. So, the pipe in and of itself, is not a violation of the law. As odd as it may sound, you could vape with that pipe. You could probably also, smoke regular tobacco with it. So while, we would agree that those are kind of accoutrements, if you will, of a particular culture, in and of themselves, they're not illegal. Samantha is very concerned about the lack of use of child restraining devices. Well, Samantha, we share your concern in that because that's a safety issue, and especially with children, which are placed in our care. Unfortunately, Samantha, you taking photos or kind of doing a little bit of citizen policing, if you will, is not enough. We can't use that. It has to be something that the officer observes. However, if you observe this, and you can give us a call, meaning that the white Tahoe, has a child in the front seat that's unrestrained. I just saw them at the local bank or whatever. Samantha, if you observe a vehicle with a child in it unrestrained, again, you can take all the photos that you would like. Unfortunately, we can't use those. We have to personally observe that. So if you would, call 436-9620. That's Central Dispatch. It's a non-emergency. Again, identify the vehicle for us and your current location, and we will attempt to get an officer out there. As you can imagine, Samantha, again, because last year we responded to over 247,000 calls for service. We have officers that are responding to robberies in progress, home invasions, et cetera, et cetera. So while I know that that's an important issue, especially from a child's perspective, it may not be high enough on the priority list for us to get there. What you're wanting us to correct, Samantha, is, just like so many things in society today, we're wanting to make citizens responsible and to act responsible. That's something that is far, far beyond law enforcement. But call us, we'll do our best and see if we can assist you in this matter. We have an anonymous question and or complaint about officers speeding, lane changing without signals, and of course, how can cops get away with this? Well, number one, they shouldn't get away with it. If you'll get the number off the back of the vehicle, you can make an anonymous complaint to the sheriff's office. And yes, we do in fact check those. And we encourage citizens to do that. And the reason being is we actually track those. There's a system called IA Pro, which is a computerized system. And let's say that you're vehicle number 100 and we get a call or a report this week that vehicle 100 was driving erratically, not using a turn signal and was speeding in this area. Many times today people also use their cell phones, to get a photograph of the officer's vehicle, and they'll send that to us. So now we have a complaint on vehicle 100, on this day in August. And then in 2 weeks we get another one, and guess who it's on? It's vehicle 100, and now it's the 1st of September. Those add up, and the computer program actually flags that officer and or that vehicle to tell us, hey, you've got an issue here. This officer needs to be cycled back through driving safety, or if it's a citizen complaint on your interaction with citizens that you've stopped. So you actually are doing us a favor if you report those officers and those vehicles, but I most assuredly can't stop it if you don't tell me. If you think that you've done something by calling in and making this complaint, I appreciate you bringing it to my attention, but you got to give me specifics. I can't fix things that I'm unaware of. Yeah, Marie asked a question about school buses and stopping for them, and when you can and cannot pass, or do you have to stop? Marie, the short basic answer is if you're in the lane or lanes traveling behind a school bus or approaching a school bus, if it's a 2-lane road or even a 4-lane road that is not physically separated by a median, meaning that there's a grassy area between it or some sort of concrete abutment, all traffic must stop. If you're on a 4-lane or even a 2-lane highway that has a median separation, meaning that you'd have to drive through or down or over, some sort of barrier to get to the opposing lane, you're not required to stop. So if you're behind a school bus and they stop, or you're approaching a school bus and they stop, and the flag and the stop sign goes out, if you will, everyone has to stop if you're on the same traffic flow as the school bus. If you're separated from that traffic flow, meaning by a physical median, there is no legal requirement for you to stop if you're coming with the traffic flow in the opposite direction. Hopefully that answers your question. Rick asked the question that he noticed that our officers are riding Honda motorcycles, and he was under the impression that all police vehicles, or motorcycles in this case, had to be American made. No, Rick, that's not the case. What we do is we go through a state vendor. We get approved vendors that we can do business with, and there is no requirement that vehicles or equipment that we use has to be American made. Quite the contrary. What we try to do is get the best bang for the buck, on the tax dollars that we're spending. One of the reasons why we made the motorcycle change was based upon the longevity of the vehicle or the bike itself, maintenance requirements, etc. Remember, you can also email your questions and ask the sheriff at escambiaso.com. We'll be back next week right here on Blab TV Tuesday night at 8 p.m.